Marcus Blackthorne had ruled the vampire kingdom of Valdres for over 3 centuries, but the last 50 years had been shrouded in eternal darkness. Not the darkness that all vampires cherished, but a personal hell that had stolen his sight during a brutal battle with vampire hunters. The silver-laced arrows that pierced his eyes had left him blind, forever dependent on his other heightened senses to navigate his domain. His castle stood like a monument to Gothic architecture, its towering spires reaching toward the perpetually cloudy sky. Within its cold stone walls, dozens of servants moved like shadows, attending to their master's every need. Among them was Elena Rodriguez, a young woman who had served as head housemaid for nearly 8 years. She was different from the others, fearless where they trembled, kind where they showed only cold efficiency. Elena had come to the castle when she was barely 18, desperate for work to support her ailing mother in the village below. What she hadn't expected was to find herself caring for a creature she had been taught to fear since childhood. Yet Marcus, despite his fearsome reputation, had never harmed her. In fact, over the years, she had noticed something almost vulnerable about the way he moved through his own home, his pale hands trailing along familiar walls, his enhanced hearing picking up every whisper, every footstep. The other servants whispered that Elena was either blessed or cursed to have caught the Vampire King's attention in a way that didn't end in bloodshed. She brought him his evening meals, not the crimson sustenance he required, but the rare delicacies he still enjoyed from his human days. She read to him from ancient texts when his advisors weren't present. Most importantly, she spoke to him as if he were still a man, not just a monster. But Elena harbored a secret that could destroy everything she had built in this strange sanctuary. Hidden in her small quarters in the servants' wing was her most precious treasure, her 4-year-old daughter Isabella. The child was the result of a brief romance with a traveling merchant who had disappeared before learning of his daughter's existence. Elena had managed to keep Isabella's presence hidden from everyone in the castle, including Marcus himself. Each night after completing her duties, Elena would sneak food and supplies to her daughter, who had learned to remain perfectly silent during the day when the vampire lord was most active. Isabella spent her days drawing pictures with charcoal on scraps of paper, creating imaginary worlds filled with sunshine and flowers, things she had never seen within the castle walls. The deception grew more difficult as Isabella grew older and more curious about the world beyond their small room. The child asked endless questions about her father, about why they couldn't leave, about the pale man with the sad voice who she sometimes heard talking to her mother in the hallways. Elena told her daughter that the man was their protector, which wasn't entirely untrue, but the full explanation would have to wait until Isabella was old enough to understand the complexity of their situation. Marcus had begun to notice subtle changes in Elena's behavior over the past year. Her heartbeat would quicken at odd times, she would disappear for longer periods between tasks, and there was a maternal tenderness in her movements that he couldn't quite place. His supernatural senses, heightened by his blindness, detected the faint scent of child soap and the barely perceptible sound of small breathing coming from the direction of Elena's quarters. However, Marcus had learned long ago not to pry too deeply into the personal lives of his human servants. They were fragile creatures with complex emotions and motivations that often puzzled him. As long as Elena continued to perform her duties with the same dedication and kindness she had always shown, he was content to let her keep her secrets. One autumn evening, as the wind howled through the castle's corridors, Isabella fell ill with a fever. Elena was torn between her duties to Marcus and her desperate need to care for her daughter. She had no choice but to bring a basin of cool water and clean cloths to her quarters during what should have been Marcus's reading time. When Elena failed to appear in his study at the usual hour, Marcus felt an unfamiliar stab of concern. In all their years together, she had never missed their evening routine without sending word through another servant. Using his walking stick and following the familiar paths through his castle, he made his way toward the servants' quarters, guided by the sound of Elena's anxious whispers and the faint whimpering of someone in distress. As he approached Elena's door, Marcus could hear her singing a soft lullaby in Spanish, her voice thick with worry. Through the thin walls, his enhanced hearing picked up the rapid heartbeat of a small child and Elena's gentle murmurs of comfort. The pieces of the puzzle he had been unconsciously assembling for months suddenly clicked into place. Elena had a child she had been hiding from him for years. Marcus stood frozen outside the door, his hand raised to knock, as 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Why had she hidden this from him? Did she truly believe he would harm an innocent child? More troubling still, what did this revelation mean for their relationship, which had slowly evolved into something deeper than master and servant, though neither had acknowledged it aloud? Inside the room, Isabella's fever broke, and in her delirium she spoke her first clear words in hours. "Mama, is the sad angel man going to help me feel better?" Elena's blood turned to ice as she realized that her daughter had somehow become aware of Marcus's presence in the castle, perhaps through the thin walls or her own supernatural intuition. At that moment, a loose floorboard creaked outside their door, and Elena knew with absolute certainty that her carefully guarded secret was about to be exposed. Her hands trembled as she smoothed Isabella's dark hair away from her feverish face, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just her own fate, but that of her precious daughter as well. Marcus's voice came through the door, softer than Elena had ever heard it, almost human in its gentleness. "Elena, may I come in? I believe your daughter needs help that I might be able to provide." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Isabella's labored breathing and the sound of Elena's heart hammering against her ribs. After what felt like an eternity, Elena's shaking voice whispered back, "Yes, my lord. Please come in." The door opened with a soft creak, and Marcus stepped into the small chamber that had been Elena's sanctuary for years. His milky white eyes, forever sightless, turned toward the sound of labored breathing coming from the narrow bed against the far wall. The room smelled of fever and fear, tinged with the innocent scent of childhood that he hadn't encountered in decades. "She's burning up," Elena whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and terror. "I don't know what else to do. The fever won't break, and I can't take her to the village doctor without risking exposure." Marcus moved slowly across the room, his enhanced senses mapping every detail of the cramped space. He could hear Elena's rapid heartbeat, smell her tears, and detect the precise location of the small form writhing on the bed. But most importantly, he could sense something about the child that made his ancient heart stutter in his chest. "What is her name?" he asked softly, settling into the chair Elena had pulled beside the bed. "Isabella," Elena replied, watching carefully as the vampire king she had served for years revealed a side of himself she had never witnessed. His pale hands, which she had seen sign death warrants and crush enemies, moved with infinite gentleness as he reached toward her daughter. "Isabella," Marcus repeated, testing the name on his lips. "May I touch her forehead?" "I promise you I mean her no harm." Elena nodded, then realized he couldn't see the gesture. "Yes," she whispered. When Marcus's cold hand made contact with Isabella's burning skin, several things happened at once. The child's fever began to recede almost immediately, as if his vampire nature was somehow neutralizing the infection. But more shocking still, Isabella's eyes fluttered open, and she looked directly at Marcus with a clarity that defied her previous delirium. "You're the sad angel man," Isabella said in a voice much stronger than it had been moments before. "Mama told me you were our protector, but she was scared to tell you about me." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, not physically. This child, who should have been terrified of him, was looking at him with complete trust. Her small hand reached up and touched his scarred cheek with innocent curiosity. "Why are your eyes cloudy?" Isabella asked, tilting her head to study his face. "Did someone hurt you?" "Yes, little one," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone hurt me a long time ago, and now I cannot see the world the way you do." Isabella considered this information with the seriousness only children can muster. "That's why you're sad, but you're not scary like Mama worried. You're just lonely." Elena watched in amazement as her daughter, who had never interacted with anyone besides herself, seemed to understand Marcus in a way that eluded most adults. The vampire king sat perfectly still as Isabella's small fingers traced the scars around his eyes, her touch somehow soothing wounds that had ached for decades. "With trust, Teddy." "Elena," Marcus said finally, never taking his attention from the child. "How long have you been hiding her?" "Since before she could walk," Elena admitted. "I was pregnant when I came to work here, but I didn't know it yet. When I realized, I was terrified you would send me away or worse. And you've cared for her alone all this time? Fed her, taught her, loved her, all while maintaining your duties to me?" Elena nodded again, then caught herself. "Yes, my lord. I had no choice." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. "You had a choice, Elena. You could have left, found work elsewhere, raised your daughter in the sunlight she deserves. Instead, you stayed. Why?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena looked at her daughter, now sitting up in bed with her fever completely gone, playing with the silver buttons on Marcus's black coat as if they were the most fascinating toys in the world. "Because," Elena said slowly, "despite what everyone believes about you, I've seen your kindness, the way you remember the names of servants who died decades ago, how you ensure the village has food during harsh winters, even though they fear you. The night you sat with old Thomas when he was dying, holding his hand until dawn, even though the approaching sunlight weakened you." Marcus turned his blind gaze toward Elena, and she saw something in his expression she had never witnessed before. "You stayed because you weren't afraid of me," he said. "I stayed because I was falling in love with you," Elena whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. The silence that followed was broken by Isabella's innocent voice. "Are you going to marry my mama? Because she cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping, and I think it's because she loves you but is scared to tell you." Both adults stared at the child in shock. Isabella, apparently satisfied with her observation, curled up against Marcus's side as if she had known him her entire life. "Isabella," Marcus said carefully, "what would you think if I told you that I'm not human like your mother?" The 4-year-old looked up at him with those perceptive dark eyes. "I know you're different. You smell like old books in winter, and your skin is cold like stones. But you made my fever go away, and you make Mama happy when you read together in the evenings. That's what matters." Marcus felt centuries of carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crumble. This child, innocent and pure, had accepted him more readily than any adult ever had. She saw past his monstrous nature to something he had forgotten existed within himself. "Elena," he said, his voice stronger now, "I have a proposition for you. Move from this small room into the family wing of the castle. Let me provide for Isabella properly. Tutors, books, toys, everything she needs. Let me give her the childhood she deserves." "And in return?" Elena asked, though her heart was already racing with hope. "In return, allow me to be part of her life. Allow me to protect both of you as I should have been doing all along. And perhaps," he paused, his hand gently stroking Isabella's hair as she dozed against him, "allow me the chance to prove that monsters can learn to love." Elena reached out and covered his free hand with both of hers. "Marcus, you don't have to prove anything. You already have." As if sensing the significance of the moment, Isabella stirred and looked up at both of them. "Does this mean I can finally see the rest of the big house? And maybe learn to read like Mama does for the sad angel man?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile that had crossed his features in decades. "Yes, little princess, tomorrow we'll begin your grand adventure, but first you need to rest and get completely well." As Elena tucked Isabella into her small bed for what would be the last time in this cramped room, the child asked one final question that would haunt Marcus for days to come. "Angel man, if you can't see, how do you know I'm not just a dream?" Marcus was quiet for so long that both Elena and Isabella thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Because, little one, dreams have never made me feel this human again." Outside the window, storm clouds gathered, but for the first time in 50 years, Marcus looked forward to tomorrow. He had found something he thought was lost forever, a family. And they had found something they never dared hope for, acceptance and unconditional love from the most unlikely source imaginable. The vampire king, the loyal maid, and her extraordinary daughter were about to embark on a journey that would transform not just their lives, but challenge everything the world believed about monsters and the capacity for redemption. 6 months had passed since that transformative night when Isabella's fever broke the barriers that had kept three souls apart for years. The castle that had once echoed with cold formality now rang with the laughter of a child discovering the world around her. Isabella had not only recovered completely from her illness, but seemed to thrive in ways that amazed everyone who witnessed her growth. The family wing of the castle, unused for over a century, had been transformed into a warm haven. Elena's new chambers connected to Isabella's through an ornate door that was never locked. Marcus had insisted on having his own rooms relocated to the same corridor, claiming it was more convenient for their evening routines. In truth, he found comfort in hearing their quiet conversations through the walls, the sound of Isabella's bedtime stories, and Elena's gentle humming as she went about her daily tasks. Isabella had adapted to her new life with the resilience that only children possess. She spent her mornings with Elena learning basic lessons, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Her afternoons were devoted to exploring the vast castle under Marcus's patient guidance, her small hand tucked securely in his as he navigated the corridors he had memorized over centuries of darkness. What surprised everyone, including Marcus himself, was Isabella's remarkable ability to serve as his eyes in ways that went beyond simple description. She had developed an intuitive understanding of what he needed to know about their surroundings, offering details that painted vivid pictures in his mind. "The rose garden is blooming again," she would tell him during their walks. "The red ones by the fountain are as bright as Mama's favorite dress, and the white ones smell like the soap she uses. There's a butterfly with orange and black wings sitting on the statue of the lady with the sad face." These descriptions weren't just observations. They were gifts that restored color and life to Marcus's world in ways he had never expected. Through Isabella's eyes, he began to see his domain not as a cold fortress, but as a place capable of beauty and wonder. Elena watched this developing relationship with a mixture of joy and amazement. Marcus, who had once seemed so untouchable and remote, would spend hours answering Isabella's endless questions about the castle's history, telling her stories about the various artifacts they encountered, and patiently teaching her to identify different servants by their footsteps and voices. The transformation wasn't limited to Marcus and Isabella. Elena found herself stepping into a role she had never imagined, not just as head housemaid, but as Marcus's trusted advisor and companion. He began consulting her on matters of estate management, seeking her input on decisions that affected the village below, and including her in evening meetings with his vampire council. The other servants noticed the changes as well. The atmosphere in the castle lightened considerably. Marcus's temper, once quick and dangerous, seemed to have mellowed. He showed more patience with mistakes, more consideration for his staff's welfare, and even implemented improvements to their living conditions based on suggestions Elena brought to his attention. However, not everyone was pleased with these developments. Dr. Vincent Ashford, Marcus's longtime advisor and fellow vampire, watched the proceedings with growing concern. Vincent had served as Marcus's strategic counselor for over 2 centuries and viewed the presence of humans in the family wing as a dangerous weakness. "You're compromising everything we've built," Vincent warned during one of their private meetings. "The other vampire lords are beginning to question your judgment. They see your attachment to these humans as a sign of weakness, a vulnerability they could exploit." Marcus listened to these concerns with the same patience he showed Isabella, but his response was firm. "Let them question. Elena and Isabella have brought something to this castle that was missing for far too long. purpose beyond mere survival. Her purpose. Vincent's voice carried centuries of skepticism. Marcus, you're a vampire king, not a family man. This sentimentality will be our downfall. Perhaps, Marcus replied calmly. But for the first time in 50 years, I look forward to tomorrow. That has value beyond any political advantage. The tension came to a head when Lord Damien Corvus, a powerful vampire from the Northern Territories, arrived for an unexpected visit. Damien had heard rumors about Marcus's unusual household arrangement and came to assess whether the legendary vampire king of Valdris had gone soft. Damien's arrival coincided with Isabella's 5th birthday, an event that Elena and Marcus had been planning for weeks. The great hall had been decorated with flowers from the castle gardens, and the kitchen staff had prepared a feast that included both human delicacies and the sustenance required by vampire guests. "You shall be totally fair," Damien observed coldly as he watched Isabella blow out the candles on her cake, her face glowing with pure joy. "It's called happiness, Damien," Marcus replied without apology. "You might try it sometime." The real test came when Isabella, emboldened by the festive atmosphere and curious about their intimidating guest, approached Damien with the fearlessness that had charmed Marcus months earlier. "You look angry," she told Damien with typical childhood directness. "Did someone hurt your feelings?" The ancient vampire, who had terrorized humans for over 4 centuries, found himself staring down at a small child who showed no fear, only genuine concern for his emotional well-being. "I don't have feelings, little human," Damien replied, his voice intended to frighten. Isabella tilted her head thoughtfully. "Everyone has feelings. Even Angel Man does, though he tried to hide them for a long time. Maybe you're just scared to show yours." The simplicity of her observation struck Damien like a physical blow. Here was a child who saw through centuries of carefully constructed intimidation to something vulnerable beneath. Elena watched the interaction with her heart in her throat, ready to step between her daughter and danger. But Marcus remained calm, trusting Isabella's instincts and her remarkable ability to reach through to people's better nature. "Would you like some cake?" Isabella offered, apparently deciding that Damien's problem was easily solved with kindness. "Mama made it special, and it tastes like sunshine." For a moment that stretched into eternity, the great hall was silent, except for the crackling of the fireplace. Then, to everyone's amazement, Damien knelt down to Isabella's level. "I haven't tasted sunshine in a very long time, child. Perhaps one small piece wouldn't hurt." As Isabella clapped her hands in delight and ran to get Damien a plate, Elena caught Marcus's expression. His blind eyes were directed toward the sound of his former enemy sharing cake with his adopted daughter, and there was something like wonder on his face. Later that evening, after Damien had departed with unexpected warmth in his farewells and promises to return for future visits, Marcus found Elena and Isabella in the garden. Isabella was chasing fireflies while Elena watched from a marble bench, her face peaceful in the moonlight. "She's remarkable," Marcus said, settling beside Elena. "In 5 years, she's accomplished what centuries of diplomacy couldn't achieve. Damien left here tonight a different vampire than when he arrived." "She has a gift for seeing the good in people," Elena agreed, watching their daughter's joyful dance among the glowing insects, even when those people have forgotten it exists in themselves. "As do you," Marcus said softly, taking Elena's hand in his. "You saw something worth loving in a blind, bitter vampire king. You made me remember that I was once a man who believed in hope, in love, in the possibility of redemption." Elena turned to face him, her free hand reaching up to touch his scarred cheek. "You never lost those things, Marcus. You just needed someone to remind you they were still there." Isabella ran up to them, breathless with excitement, her small hands cupped around a captured firefly. "Look! I caught some light for Angel Man! Maybe it will help him see better." Marcus smiled and held out his hands. Isabella placed the firefly gently in his palms, where it glowed softly before taking flight again. "You know something, little princess?" Marcus said, watching the firefly disappear into the darkness with senses other than sight. I think my vision has never been clearer. As the three of them sat together in the garden under a canopy of stars, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had been a monster who learned to love. Elena had been a servant who became a queen in all but name. And Isabella had been a hidden child who became the light that illuminated them all. The future stretched before them, uncertain but no longer empty. There would be challenges ahead, other vampire lords to convince, human villagers to win over, and the constant balance between Marcus's vampire nature and his chosen family's humanity. But they would face those challenges together, as a family forged not by blood but by choice, not by fate but by love. In the end, what occurred when the sightless vampire king encountered the maid's child was nothing short of a miracle. He found his sight in her innocence, his humanity in her mother's love, and his purpose in protecting something more precious than power or immortality, a family that saw past his darkness to the light that had always existed within his heart. What occurs when the sightless vampire king encounters the maid's child?